This is the CPU, or Central Processing Unit. This is the brain of the computer. This is what is responsible for running all of your games, operating system, and software. Without this, the computer would not be a computer, as it would not be able to compute anything. The GPU, or Graphics Processing Unit, is the eye of the computer. This is what is responsible for outputting an image to the screen and rendering all your games and graphics. In this system, the GPU is integrated into the CPU. This is the motherboard. The motherboard is the central nervous system of the computer. This is what allows all the components to communicate with one another, just like how all your nerves send signals throughout your body. Without a motherboard, the computer would just be a collection of discrete, unconnected components. This is the RAM. RAM, or Random Access Memory, is the short-term memory for the computer. This is where all the data is held for the current tasks that the computer is working on. Think of when you are doing math in your head. 2 times 4 equals 8. For this task, you need to store both numbers in your short-term memory to compute the result. RAM serves the exact same function for the computer. This is an SSD. An SSD, or solid-state drive, acts as a long-term storage for the computer. This is where all your files, applications, and games are stored. Think of this like your memories, information you remember over long periods of time. The computer can retrieve stored information just like how you can remember something that happened a long time ago. This is the power supply. The power supply is the heart and circulatory system of the computer. The power supply supplies electricity to all components of the computer, just like how your heart supplies blood throughout your body. Other components in this build are the chassis and the cooling fans. The only tools required for this build is a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver, some zip ties for cable management, and wire cutters in case you messed up your cable management and need to cut the zip ties. Be extremely careful with the CPU, because if you bend or break any of the golden pins on the bottom, the CPU will be broken. Start by unboxing your motherboard and placing it flat down on your work surface. We're going to start by installing the CPU. So raise the little lever here, raise it up just like that. Make sure to align the golden triangle on the CPU with the triangle on the motherboard. Then simply install the CPU. Make sure the text is facing towards the lever. And then lower down the lever. And you have now installed your CPU. Next, we are going to be installing the RAM. So just open these little clips, just like that. Ba-ding, ba-doom. Take your RAM, make sure that the notch in the RAM aligns to the notch in the RAM slot, otherwise it won't slot in. And then just flip it in, and then do the same for the second module. And now you have installed your RAM. So now we're going to be installing the SSD. Start by unscrewing the heatsink. Just remove the screws, just like that. Remove the heatsink. Unpeel the piece of plastic that was protecting the thermal pad. Install the SSD into the slot, just like that. Just push it in. Put the heatsink back on, just like that. Take your screws and screw the heatsink back in. Take the other screw and screw that screw back in. Now you have installed your SSD. So next we will be installing the heatsink. So just remove these unnecessary plastic brackets here. Make sure that the back plate is installed. Make sure that the standoffs are going through the holes, like that. And then place your cooler right down. Make sure the screws align with those standoffs. And then screw it into a star pattern, kind of as shown. So start with the top corner, then move on to the other corner, the bottom corner on the other side. Just kind of slowly torque them down as you go. Kind of screw it down gently, just make sure that the spring is compressed, you can't over tighten it. And then plug in the fan. So just plug in the CPU fan into the CPU fan header. Alright, so now that we have installed everything onto the motherboard, we are going to test the system. So grab your power supply and take your 24-pin cable, the biggest one, and plug it into its slot on the motherboard. It's a rather tight fit, so just kind of, don't worry about forcing it. Just plug it in there. Then take your CPU power connectors, plug those into the motherboard right here, and then plug in your display, just like that. So flip the switch on your power supply so that it's in the I position for on. I forgot to do that in this clip. And then plug in the power supply, plug in the power cable. So find this front panel header here on the front of the motherboard, and then short out the highlighted pins to fire up the computer for the first time. Basically what's happening now is the system is firing up. It's going through what is called a post sequence or power on self-test. Basically that means the computer is checking that all of the vital components such as the RAM and the CPU and the graphics card and stuff are all present and functional. It's also doing something called memory training, where it's going through all these bajillion settings and making sure the RAM is configured correctly. Then this is the startup LEDs, or the debug LEDs. So basically those, it'll light up saying, okay, look, the CPU is good, we're checking the CPU, we're checking the graphics card, we're checking the power supply, we're checking all these things. And those LEDs will tell you if there is a problem. But when it goes to boot, that means you're good and it's about to start up. Alright, so we're good. The system has powered on, it has booted, and everything is good. Alright, so now that we know it works, let's unplug the display cable, the CPU power connector, and the 24-pin cable. The 24-pin is very tight, so don't be afraid to wiggle it and use some force to get it out. So next, unscrew and remove the side panel. Just carefully remove these little thumb screws here, put them somewhere safe, because you will need them later when you want to reattach the side panel when you're done building. So there we go, just slide it off, it just slides right off, just like that. Alright, so just remove these little twisties that are holding in the case cables, and then remove this SSD bracket. We will be reinstalling it later. For now, just unscrew it and remove it and put it somewhere safe. So next we will be removing the front of the case. Just get your fingers under there and yoink off the panel, but be careful not to like rip the cables or connectors because they are attached to it. So next we will remove the stock fan the case comes with because it is not very powerful, and we will be replacing it with a better fan. So just unscrew those screws, keep them safe because we will need them in the next step. Alright, so now we will be installing the Arctic fan. So just install it just as shown, just like that. Get right there. And then this is the fan screw. You just removed all the 4 of them. You just removed in the previous step. And just screw the new fan in. Pretty simple, just screw it in, just like that. Alright, so now that you have installed the fancy Arctic fan, just put the front panel of the case back on. Just make sure it's the right way up. And then it just clips right back on. Just clip it in on the corners, and you are good. So next, we will be installing the IO shield. Just install it just as shown, and it just clips into place. You just have to press it in. Alright, so now grab the bag of screws out of the box of goodies you found in the case. Alright, so next you are going to install these motherboard standoffs. Okay, so they're a little fiddly. They don't always screw in properly, and that's fine. Don't worry about it. As long as you're able to get 4 in the corners, as you'll see in a second, as long as you get 4 in the corners, that's enough. So don't worry if you can't get them all in. They're very fiddly. Even I have trouble with it. So with that being said, highlighted are the locations where you're supposed to install the standoffs, but again, if you can't install all of them, don't worry. Just focus on the ones in the corners, and that should be good enough. Alright, so now it's time to install the motherboard into the case. You kind of have to put it in at a very steep angle like this, otherwise it'll collide. with things, so just kind of gently place it in there. And make sure that it A, aligns with the I/O shield you installed before, and B, installs with the standoffs you just installed. So just try to align it up and you should be good. So just make sure everything's all nice and aligned, as we see here. If it looks like this, we should be good. Now you're ready to screw down the motherboard. Alright, so this is a motherboard screw. You will use these to install the motherboard. So just screw them down into all the standoffs that align. Again, sometimes, even if you install the standoffs correctly, they just don't line up. It's a cheap case. It happens. Don't worry about it. Just install as many screws as you can, and you'll be golden. Alright, so now it's time to install the rear fan. This is smaller than the front fan. Here are the screws, remember these. And just screw it in. Alright, so now it is time to reinstall the power supply into the case. Make sure the cables are facing that way. And then it goes right in the top. Right above the motherboard, right above that little fan you just installed. So it's right up there, right in the top of the case. Then these are the power supply screws. They have this hex on them. They look like this. And make sure that all of these screw holes align. So I made the mistake of screwing these screws down too tightly before I got everything aligned. So if that happens, just loosen some of the screws, align everything, and then tighten it back down again. Alright, so now we're going to reinstall the 24 pin. Just make sure to route it under everything else and plug it in again. It's kind of a pain, just you got to do it. Then we're going to install the CPU power connector right there. Just plugs in just like that. And then for cable management, just kind of tie up all the loose cables and all the extra cables and just tie everything up the best you can and jam them up in the top, right? We're in the 5 1/4 inch bay as it'd be, just right in that top little empty compartment. Just cinch them all down and whack them up there and you should be good. Alright, so now it's time to plug everything else in. So install the cable for the rear fan right there to system fan 3. Here's the front panel USB 3 connector, installs right there. Here's the front panel USB 2 connector, it installs right there. Alright, so this is the cable for the front headphone jack, it plugs in right there. And then this is for the power switch, again, just plug it in right here on that header. And then again, just tie everything up and whack it away. You can install the front fan, the cable for the front fan right there into system fan number 2. And then just plug everything back in again. So plug in your power connector, make sure the case is in the I position. Plug in your HDMI cable, screw in your Wi-Fi antennas, and you're ready to go. It's ready to boot, baby. So fire it up, fire it on, and look at that, it boots, yay! So here are the final things now. So just reinstall that SSD bracket from earlier. Remember the one you removed when you first opened up the case. Just screw that back in. It screws in right there. It has 3 little thumb screws on it. And now that you know it works, just seal up that side panel. You know, it's booted. You can put it on now. It is bad juju to reinstall the side panel before you've test booted it though. So make sure to do that after, just right now, because that's where we put this in the video. Yep, just screw it in. Screw in those thumb screws. And here's the most important part, the very important part of putting your case stickers on there. Oh yeah, so then everybody knows what a fancy computer you got. So you got your little AMD CPU sticker there, and then the Radeon graphics sticker. So again, are the most important part because it signals to everyone else that you have a rad PC.